Chapter number 2, Volition, the basis of karma. Sutra number 2. Ultimately, life is neither suffering nor bliss. It is what you make it. The consequence of calculation. It happened. On a certain evening, two friends were walking together. It was their weekly custom to visit a prostitute every Saturday evening. While they were walking toward the prostitute's house, they heard a voice delivering a discourse on the Bhagavad Gita, India's great sacred text. One friend was seized by guilt. He decided not to visit the prostitute and said he would rather improve himself by attending the lecture of the Gita. The other man left him there and went ahead. Now, the man sitting in the lecture hall found his thoughts were full of his friend who was with the prostitute. He began to envy him. While he was stuck in this lecture room, the other man, who was convinced he was having the time of his life. He couldn't help feeling his friend was far more intelligent in choosing the brothel over scriptural discourse. Now the man who had gone to the prostitute's house found his mind was full of his friend at the lecture hall. He was filled with admiration for his friend who had chosen the path of liberation by opting for spiritual discourse over carnal pleasures. This story was often related by the great 20th century Indian mystic Sri Ramaskrishna Paramahamsa. He always drew attention to the central paradox. It is the man of the Gita discourse who kept thinking about what was happening in the prostitute's house who piled up the adverse karma. It is he who suffered, Sri Ramakrishna pointed out, much more than the man who visited the prostitute. Why? Because although karma denotes action of the body, mind, and energy, it is not about action alone. The man who went to the prostitute did not pile up as much karma as his friend because he did not make a calculation. His friend, on the other hand, secretly wished he was with her, but believed that by going to the discourse he would get one step closer to heaven. That calculation meant an acquisition of more karma. Ironically, the man who thought about how to shed karma actually ended up accumulating it. The man with the prostitute, on the other hand, was seized by a sense of limitation of his experience. They would have impelled him in the future to seek something more, so the experience with the prostitute became a trigger for his personal growth. The story points to a common mistake. People often assume karma is only about external action. They think performing acts of charity and virtue will earn them good karma. What they never quite realize is that it is about something much subtler. Karma is much more fundamentally about volition. The reason why religious teachings all over the world are always talking about love is that the moment you become loving, you are naturally at your best in relation to others. The moment you view everyone with love, your intentions is automatically inclusive. Regardless of what blunders you may commit in the name of love, the karma still does not accumulate beyond a point. Your intention makes all the difference. If you say something prompted by love and another person gets hurt, that is his karma, not yours. But if you say something out of hatred and another person has no problem with it, it is good karma for them and not for you. You still acquire negative karma. How the recipient of your hatred reacts is not the point. The accumulation of karma is determined by your intention, not merely by its impact on someone else. Consider another situation. Let us say you are playing with a knife. It accidentally hits someone and they fall down dead. This is one kind of karma. In another scenario, you get into an argument with someone while cutting vegetables. In the heat of the moment, you stab them and they die. In a third situation, you meticulously plan how you would dispose of an enemy. You pursue them and thrust a knife into them. In a fourth scenario, you behave in a very friendly manner with someone and invite them over for dinner. After a wonderfully cordial meal, when they are sitting back sedated, you slit their throat. This is yet another kind of karma. In a fifth situation, you are perfectly normal in your behavior with a person, but internally you keep plotting all the terrible things you want to do to them. You are found out by your parents and you immediately start feeling guilty. Wearing a miniskirt in some parts of India. Oh, I'm sorry, skipped a page. In the first cases, the same ingredients are present: you, the other person, the knife, and death. Karma, however, is not the same. It is not difficult to guess which will breed the worst karmas. By worst, I do not mean the most immoral. I mean that which creates the worst consequences for you. The consequence for the other person is the same, but the impact on you is determined by the nature of your volition. It is the level of bitterness and hatred that causes karma, not the act alone. The fifth scenario is actually the worst in terms of karmic accumulation. The first four talk about situations in which the result is the same for the other person. In the fifth, there is no consequence for the other person. They have been released from their karma, so it is good for them. But your karma is much stronger here because you are repeating the act a million times within yourself. Acting out the bitterness externally has a grave physical consequence for you, i.e., a jail sentence. But allowing the bitterness to grow and multiply within has even deeper internal consequences. Intention motivation, motivated by a personal agenda, always accrues much more karma. If you keep repeating the same mental action, it is because you have a strong personal stake in the matter. You may not be sentenced to prison, but you have imprisoned yourself. It is interesting that legal systems in most part of the world also take intention into account when determining a punishment for a crime. A cold-blooded, premeditated murder is treated quite differently, for instance, from a crime of passion committed in the heat of a moment. And yet, the karmic consequence is not a punishment. The consequence is simply a life's way of trying to work out the karma you are constantly creating. If you perform only negative mental karma, there may be no external consequence, but you experience a deeper level of internal suffering. What does working out karma mean? It means that the play of your life is happening according to your tendencies, not according to some systems of right and wrong. Your life simply organizes itself in order to fulfill your inclinations. Karma is not a punishment or a reward. It just it is just the process by which life tries to fulfill itself. A level of volition that many people are unaware of is action on the energy level. A negative thought, as we know, can breed karma. A negative thought combined with a negative emotion means a deeper karma. When a negative thought, a negative emotion, and a negative external action combine, there is even deeper karma. When a negative thought, a negative emotion combined with recurrent mental action, that karma is deeper still, i.e., killing someone in your head 1,000 different ways, as we saw, accumulates a great deal of karma. However, there are those who opt for energy-based actions. This could be engaging in practices that result in the death of an adversary or rival, or any person that they want to get out of their way. Such practices are known as occult or black magic. These occult systems exist on the fringes of many cultures wherein a few experts have approached to use their energies to cause harm to someone else. Once you energetically try to influence someone else for your own benefit, it is the worst possible karma. The karma generated by energy-based actions goes deeper than any kind of action. Let us not forget that what is right volition in one context may be markedly different in another. You can have certain ideas of right and wrong because of the moral code of the society you live in. It is not your innate nature that dictates these codes. Society has certain fixed mores and rules, and whenever you flout them, you feel you have erred. You may never gamble before your parents, but you may do it quite easily with your friends. If you are found out by your parents, you immediately start feeling guilty. Wearing a miniskirt in some parts of India may be considered outrageous. Similarly, being covered from top to toe in some parts of the world may be considered bizarre or inappropriate. These are not instinctively right or wrong behaviors. It is society that deems what they are. However, if dressing differently from a social norm induces guilt or shame in the wearer, it could mean the accumulation of karma. It happened. Shankaran Pillai was on his deathbed. Knowing his end was near, he summoned his lawyer. He said, "I want to make a new will. I would like to leave my entire inheritance down to the last dollar to my wife, but I want to insist on just one precondition. She must marry within 90 days of my death. The lawyer was surprised. Why such a strange request, Mr. Pillai? Well, I want at least one person to regret that I died. So what is very bitter for one person could be a blessing for another. One person's ideal of hell could be another's idea of heaven. Ideas of right and wrong are inherently relative. For example, the Pindaris, a bandit tribe of India, were trained to rob and kill. The members of this tribe even had gods who taught them skills and brought them success in their banditry. When the British army was let loose on them, they were shot and killed indiscriminately. They were completely bewildered, because in their perception they had done nothing wrong. The Pindari idea of virtue was simply to be a good bandit. Thus, it is not simply doing a deed that accumulates karma, it is how you do it, and with what motive it is performed that makes all the difference. Seeds of volition. So what determines human volition? Why do some people operate out of a greater sense of inclusiveness and others out of a greater sense of exclusiveness? Look at this closely. You will see that volition is shaped fundamentally by your belief that you are a separate being, an individual. In other words, it is your identification with your individuality that determines your volition. The operative word here is identification. If you were not identified with this sense of separateness, you would not be accumulating karma. If your identification was all-inclusive, that would be the end of the karmic cycle. Unfortunately, people's identification with narrow notions of individuality makes them engage with the world selectively rather than inclusively. The endless oscillation between like and dislike, attraction and aversion, further hardens their sense of separateness. Over time, likes and dislikes freeze into personality and produce more karma. Individuality now becomes a prison rather than a privilege. Gautama, the Buddha's teachings on this subject, his emphasis on desirelessness in particular, have unfortunately been misinterpreted and mutilated by many. Now, this was indiscriminately perceptive man who would have known only too well that without desire there can be no existence. What he was pointing to was the importance of operating at a state of inner fulfillment rather than inner hankering. Once this is accomplished, your life becomes an expression of bliss, not a pursuit of it. Your desire does not evaporate. Instead, it becomes a conscious. Your desire is no longer the unconscious fuel of your personal identity. It is the conscious tool by which you function. You will now desire the well-being of the entire planet. The cruise of the matter, therefore, the identification with your desires, when you are no longer identified with your desires, wherein there is a distance between you and your mind, you simply do what is needed for the moment and for your situation. You learn to play with the desire. The desires are no longer about you anymore. Now your karmic bondage vanishes entirely. How can one disidentify with desire? How can there be desire without individuality, intention without identity? The logic is simple. Individuality is a myth. It is an idea, a non-existent existential reality. We have fragmented our world out of ignorance. Once you are in touch with the foundation of intelligence that underlies all of creation, you realize that you are not separate from anyone or anything else. You are inseparably linked to the rest of the universe. Your body already knows that it is part of a great molecular dance of the cosmos. It knows that it will not survive for a moment without transacting with air, water, sunlight, and earth. Your mind, however, believes otherwise. It is convinced it is a limited entity. Therefore, any volition based on this limited understanding goes against the fundamental design of the source of creation. Any act that is impelled by such short-sighted and narrow volition invariably means karma, or, in other words, more compulsive existence. Human beings have come to life on this planet with a tremendous possibility that of absolute freedom. The yogic culture has reiterated that this this time and again. Every other animal has a fixed nature. They are simply operating on the basis of their instincts. This is why animals accumulate minimal karma. The human being, on the other hand, has come with the incredible capacity of transforming and transcending these instincts. Unfortunately, most people do not have the necessary stability to remove themselves from the activity they are performing. They are unable to act without a personal agenda. This is the crippling limitation they have imposed upon themselves. It happened. On a certain day, Shankaran Pillai went to the bar. He parked his donkey, which happened to be his mode of transportation, outside. After downing a few drinks, he came out and found that someone had painted his donkey red. Shankaran Pillai was a very frail man, but now, with a couple of drinks aside, he felt big. He flew into a rage, strode back into the bar, kicked the doors open, and stood glaring at everyone seated there. "Who painted my donkey red?" he snarled. A huge man, well over 6 feet tall, loomed over in the corner. "I did," he said. Shankaran Pillai's manner changed instantly. He cleared his throat and politely said, "Sir, it is now ready for the second coat." The above is, of course, an expedient reaction to a situation. Like most people, Shankaran Pillai's reaction was based on simple survival instinct in the face of a threat. There is a difference, however, between reaction based on self-preservation and a response based on instinctive needs of a situation. When your actions are no longer about you, when they are simply based on the demands of a situation, when a narrow self-interest no longer fuels your volition, you have reached the end of a karmic production. Your liberation is assured. Of course, this is easier said than done. The problem is that people have forgotten how to be inclusively involved with life. Since their involvement is selective, they fall into the trap of entanglement. They either engage with life selectively, or on the basis of their likes and dislikes, or opt for life-sapping philosophies of denial and detachment. In both cases, karma only multiplies. Misconceptions of this kind are many. Many believe that Buddha preached that life is suffering, or dukkha, and conclude that his is therefore a dismal outlook of defeatism. What they overlook is that the Buddha spent his life trying to teach people meditation because he saw that humanity has transcended suffering, can transcend suffering. If he believed that suffering was all, he would have advised us to commit suicide. He saw that bliss, ananda, was a very real possibility. His life mission was to remind us of it. A journalist recently asked me, "Do you agree that life is suffering?" I asked him, "If you had a choice, what would you want to be? What would you want your life to be? Suffering or bliss?" He immediately replied, "Bliss, of course." Ultimately, life is neither suffering nor bliss. It is what you want it to be. Life has no inherent quality whatsoever. The choice is always yours. The volition is always yours. Adiyogi, the first yogi, was the first figure on this planet to assert the spiritual evolution in this great possibility, available only to humanity. The human being has come with the possibility of being a completely conscious being, rather than a compulsive one. We can choose to be whichever way we want, a tiger or a deer, a divinity or a demon. We have no fixed nature. Unfortunately, we suffer this fluidity, this phenomenal gift of freedom. Most people have turned into human animals or creatures, not human beings. We have frittered away our freedom, bartered and sold it to external authorities, whether parental, religious, cultural, or political. Instead of exercising the freedom of consciousness, of choice, we have bought into the voices that have told us to be human is to be limited, even sinful. And so, instead of being the finest creatures on this planet, we have turned into the worst. We kill for pleasure, for love, for hatred, for identity, for God, for just about anything, which other animals have unleashed so much wanton cruelty, animosity, and bloodshed on this planet. Ironically, human volition, the source of our freedom, has turned into a curse. Instead of journeying from instinct to intelligence, from compulsion to consciousness, we have opted to regress. We have reached the point that in our collective history where we have forgotten the enormous significance of being human on an unconscious mission of self-destruction, we have compromised the extraordinary birthright of being true masters of our lives. Avoidance accelerates karmic accumulation. There is yet another unfortunate misunderstanding around karma and volition. Since the endless oscillation between like and dislikes creates karma, philosophies of avoidance and detachment have begun to grow popular. We have seen how Gautama, the Buddha teachings of desirelessness has been misinterpreted. All these philosophies of misinterpretation spring from a single impulse to avoid karma. The irony is that the more you try to avoid karma, the more it multiplies. All the life-denying philosophies of detachment have developed because of the human fear of entanglement. What these philosophies overlook is that without an all-consuming, passionate involvement, there would be no life. What these philosophies end up denying altogether is life itself. Philosophies of detachment are essentially joyless creeds. Embracing them might produce some semblance of balance and stability in day-to-day life, but they do not lead to liberation. Instead, they frequently lead to greater karmic accumulation. Those who practice these life-denying philosophies turn slowly lifeless themselves. Inviting lifelessness is negative karma. The suppression of life is most definitely negative karma. Now, what do we mean by suppression? Doing something you do not want to do is not necessarily suppression. Some traditions, for instance, encourage practitioners to fast at certain times. This is not suppression. People often think that not doing what they want to do at any given moment is suppression. This is not so. Suppression simply means that you are experiencing life half-heartedly. To live fully is to allow yourself to experience something totally. If you allow yourself to experience hunger totally, it is wonderful and liberating. If you allow yourself to experience food totally, it is also wonderful and liberating. Unfortunately, people do not experience either hunger or food totally. If you avoid any experience, whether pain or pleasure, sorrow or joy, it is big karma. But if you go through the experience without resisting, the karma dissolves. This is why Krishna, in the great Indian epic of Mahabharata, says the hesitation is the worst of all crimes. Today, in the name of civilization and etiquette, educated people often do not experience any of their emotions fully. They cannot cry fully. They cannot laugh loudly. Over a period of time, frustration sets in and they turn joyless. Their karmic accumulation also increases. You will see that in simpler people who allow themselves to laugh and cry uninhibitedly as the impetuous arises are often much freer. They work out of their karma by experiencing each emotional state fully. Living totally does not mean just having a good time. It means experiencing anything that comes your way fully and intensely. The very process of life is the dissolution of karma. If you live every moment of your life totally, you dissolve an enormous volume of karma. Why do some people suffer more than others? Why didn't the universe create everyone equal? Why are some disabled and others able-bodied? Why are some poor and others rich? If there is a God, why didn't he create everyone equal? Why couldn't everyone carry positive karma? Why couldn't everyone have the same software? What is the point of all this terrible inequality? These are questions that have plagued human beings since the dawn of time. Now pause and examine this with absolute clarity. If you do, you will see the primary cause of human suffering is not physical handicap or poverty. The cause of human suffering is oneself. Let us first make the distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is physical. Pain is produced whenever there is an injury to the body. Pain is the body's way of alerting you that something is wrong. That action must be taken. Pain is useful. It is a valuable wake-up call. Suffering, on the other hand, is psychological. It is produced by you. It is 100% self-manufactured. You don't have a choice about being in pain, but you do have a choice about suffering. You can always choose not to suffer. Let us look at this closely. 1,000 years ago, people all over the world lived quite happily in modest dwellings. That was not a problem. The problem today is that some lives in a mansion, and someone lives in a mansion, and someone else lives in a one-bedroom apartment. That is the source of the latter's suffering. Some someone someone has three cars, and someone else has one. That is the source of the latter's suffering. Someone vacations abroad, and someone else doesn't. That is the source of the latter's suffering. So it is not the physical situation that causes misery, it is the way you react to it. Your karma is not what is happening to you. Your karma is in the way you respond to what is happening to you. Human beings are capable of suffering just about anything. Someone could not get into college, so they suffer. Someone else gets into college and can't get out, so they suffer. Someone cannot get a job, so they suffer. Someone has given a job, and now they suffer even more. Someone isn't married, so they suffer. Someone gets married, and they are in agony. Someone has no children, so they suffer. Someone has children, and they are in constant torment. Your suffering is not because of your circumstances. Your suffering is because of the way you made yourself, and that is why you need to look at, is what you need to look at. But what about fate and fortune? What about the endless debate between free will and destiny? These questions are still vex many people. Whenever I am asked these questions, my first response is to point out that this argument can rage on forever. Do you want to spend your life debating it? Like the chicken and egg argument, it can go on and on until the end of time. And it happened. One day, after a break of almost 25 years, Shankaran Pillai met up with a bunch of his college friends. They all gathered in a restaurant to celebrate. They ordered, and food and drinks came. As they were talking, naturally, the inevitable question came up. Which do you think comes first, the chicken or the egg? And a huge debate began. But as everyone was busy arguing, Shankaran Pillai was busy guzzling down his drink and eating whatever snack came his way. Then his friends asked, Hey, are you interested in such an important debate? Don't you want to know? Which do you think came first, the chicken or the egg? Shankaran Pillai looked up and said, Whichever you ordered first will come first. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life discussing free will and destiny? In the East, we simply say your life is your karma. This means that so much karma, that how much karma you can take into your hands depends on how much of you has become conscious. If you have mastery over your physical body, 15 to 20% of your life and destiny will be in your hands. If you have mastery over your psychological process, 50 to 60% of your life and destiny will be in your hands. If you have the mastery over your life in energies, 100% of your life and destiny could be in your hands. Suppose I plant a mango seed. Can I expect that coconuts will fall out of the mango tree when it grows up? Can I expect cherries or apples? Now that would be absurd. If I plant a mango seed, you can expect only mangoes. That much is determined by the seed. But there are other considerations over which you do have control. How many mangoes will the tree yield? What will the quality of the mangoes be? How long will it yield them? Over these factors, you certainly do have control. I should add a caveat. If you dig deep enough into life, you can change even the nature of the seed, but that takes a level of yogic accomplishment that is beyond the scope of this book. So that is the story we won't get into here. What most people call luck is just ability to be at the right place at the right time. Many of your capabilities are still unconscious, so you do not have to complete control over the kind of circumstances you attract. But there is something over which you do have control, how you react to what happens to you. Maybe you win the lottery ticket today, but still, how happily you live is something you decide. A poor man might be ecstatic if he wins $1 million, but a rich man might have much more in his bank balance and still be unhappy. So luck alone does not determine your happiness. Generally, the word karma is used in a rudimentary way to suggest that you did something bad and so bad things will happen to you. This is a very limited and simplistic way of looking at life. Karma has nothing to do with the moralistic categories of good and bad. It is related only to cause and effect. If a man comes to you now and complains that his heart is clogged up, is it because he committed some terrible deeds in his past? No. It is much more likely that he lived irresponsibly, ate and drank improperly, and messed up his system. So this is bad karma in its own way because he lived without the necessary understanding about how to treat his system. Ignorance is also a karma. As action is karma, inaction is also karma. Someone recently came to me and told me about a dear friend of his who had lost the use of his hand. Now, the accident was unfortunate, but the real question is not about how many hands you have. The real question is whether you are suffering them. Many Hindu gods and goddesses are presented with incongruity and calendar art with four or more hands. It is highly likely that if you are granted with four hands, you would suffer that as well. You wouldn't think you were a god, you would just think you were a freak, and you would suffer for that for sure. I knew someone who had an extra finger and always had his hand stuffed in his pocket. Why? The finger didn't hurt. It had no problem. It was perfectly fine. The problem was just that everyone else had 10, so he felt weird. So it is not 9 fingers or 11 that someone is suffering. It is just that he is creating his own suffering out of comparison. This is a psychological game. Some 7 miles from the Isha Yoga Center in Coimbatore, India, is a police station. About 25 years ago, it was manned by about 8 or 9 policemen. Today it has about 14 policemen. The station is in charge of a quarter of a million people. The police station don't the police don't have a patrol car and so they don't carry guns. At any given time, around 3 or 4 policemen are on leave. Another 3 are on night duty, so only about 7 or 8 are actually at the police station. If you call them at night, one of them will ride over on a bicycle or else ask you to come to the police station to give a statement. You don't have much law enforcement machinery here, but you don't have much crime either. Many of the villagers in this area lead economically impoverished lives, but they are largely peaceful and happy people. They probably see people driving to the Isha Yoga Center in nice cars, sometimes Mercedes and Bentleys, but aren't in despair or envy about their lot. There is an odd crime, usually a family feud or caste clashes, but incidents of but the incidence of felony or murder for money is extremely low. These people may not have a conscious spiritual process, but a certain ethos has percolated deep in their psyches. For them, this is their karma. They see their life as their doing, so they feel no need to take something that belongs to another or convey another's possessions. Now, I don't want to romanticize poverty. One can argue that this is the kind of thinking that could lead to a fatalism or passivity. A certain dynamism certainly needs to be reinfused into the understanding of karma. It is important for people to feel that if their poverty is of their making, they can also turn it around. Karma means that you can change your destiny, not simply be ruled by it. But at the same time, there is something wonderful about the ability to create joy in all kinds of circumstances. These people may be poor, but they are not suffering. Suffering and misery are always by choice. Physical pain has, of course, to be handled in a very particular way, but suffering is of only the mind. If you are suffering mentally, it means that you are the source of your own suffering. You are the manufacturer of your own anguish. The karmic substance within you may happen to contain all the necessary ingredients to create suffering. Perhaps you planted all the ingredients unconsciously in your past. So what can you do about this today? The answer is simple. Don't manufacture suffering for yourself today. Maybe terrible things happened to you yesterday. Maybe you lost everything that is precious to you. But this morning, when you get up, you still have the choice not to manufacture suffering for yourself. Yes, the ingredients of misery are present. They are waiting, perhaps even tempting you, but they cannot become suffering by themselves. Suffering has to be freshly baked every day. In other words, your karma cannot turn into suffering without your cooperation. Once you are aware, this is the end of your suffering. So the source of your misery is not your past actions. The source of your misery is how you're processing the imprint of the past now. You may be carrying a kind of sack full of stinking garbage. Either you can spirit yourself with it and get terribly miserable, or you can make good mature manure out of it and create a wonderful garden. Karma is the seed. What you are going to make out of it is entirely up to you. If I am given a packet of assorted seeds and I throw them into the garden, perhaps all of them will sprout. Some of the mango seeds will yield very sweet fruit, but there may be some bitter seeds too. The Parthenon grass may be unwelcome weed, and yet I still have the choice to pull it out. I can remove what is superfluous and keep the rest. That is how your food is grown every day. A large part of agriculture is just weeding. There are naturally more weeds than plants growing even in your own garden. If you keep weeding, you will have a garden. If you sit back defeated, you will have a patch of weeds. Well, of course, some have learned to enjoy the weeds too. The same holds for your life. You may have your seed karma, but you also have your weeding karma. This is where volition comes in, and this is where the intention becomes paramount. If you decide not to perform your weeding karma, your life will just be an overgrown wilderness. If you choose to perform this simple function, your life should yield an incredibly rich harvest. Kula Vendata, the weight of collective karma. Now, is there something like collective karma? Is the suffering of a parent transmitted to the child? Why do some clans and communities seem to suffer more than others? Right now, we may perform actions as individuals, but what can we do? What we do can affect many other people as well. Our acts of intelligence and stupidity have collective consequences. If we choose to live high up in the mountains, the karma of wild animals might affect us more. But since we have chosen to live among people in social situations, other people's intentions and actions affect us. This becomes our collective karma. There is something called Kula Vendata. This refers to the suffering of a collective, the suffering of a family, a clan, or a community. It means suffering within you comes not just from your individual past, it comes from your forefathers and will be transmitted to your unborn children. This is why traditional societies are often maintained very strict demarcations in terms of intermarriage. These demarcations are later developed in orthodoxy and social discrimination, and they are not relevant in today's world. However, their origins were rooted in a certain understanding. The crew of this issue was not just about genetics. It was based on the understanding that a certain karmic memory imprinted on your energy system is transmitted to your children and thereby perpetuates suffering. It means you are creating the kind of karma that will definitely have a negative impact on your future generations. Although the demarcations have no place in the modern world, many people are creating untold misery for future generations without being aware of it. Often a great deal of self-deception is involved. These people may be regarded as pillars of society, paragons of virtue, but their ideas of their way of living can spread suffering for generations after them. In their ignorance, they are contaminating not only their own lives, but all those of their unborn offspring. So, how you live is not just about you. Whether previous generations are liberated from their karma and whether future generations do not suffer also depends upon how you exist. The kind of grace you are fortunate enough to receive in your lifetime can also affect the lives of those before you and after you. The Indian epics have stories of kings who were born not to kings, but of sages. In this practice, called Niyoga, the queen would have a child with a sage instead of her husband. This was done with the full knowledge of the king. The idea was to break the chain of suffering within the family. The king did not want his children to inherit all his negative karma. He wanted a son to be better than he could ever produce. Today, this may seem outrageous and outlandish to us, but it was based on the simple logic that a kingdom deserved the best ruler. The king did not want to cripple or poison his offspring with his own suffering, his own greed, his own desire. He wanted the best for his people. Obviously, this practice is outdated and irrelevant in modern times, as we have found democratic ways of choosing our leaders. But at the time, it was based on a certain perception of how life happens. If you go to a movie as a viewer, you may enjoy the entertainment. You may laugh, eat, cry, eat your popcorn, and come out. But filmmakers view the whole drama differently. They know how the film is made. They know the craft behind it. A mere moviegoer will never understand how the film was created. The same is true of life. There were ancient wisdom traditions that understood how life worked, and certain practices that might seem strange to us today emerged from that perception. There is a simple aspect of a collective karma as well. At the start of the 20th century, human population was at 1.6 billion. As of August 2020, the world population was estimated at 7.8 billion. Here's an example of irresponsible karma. If we have multiplied at this rate, it is definitely our own doing, and we cannot blame this on God's will. I often relate on an anecdote about the time I went into an international conference on poverty. As statistics were being shared about millions of children who die every year without nourishment, one participant stood up and said, "But isn't all this divine will?" I said, "Yes, if somebody else is starving to death, of course, it must be divine will. If someone else's children are dying of malnutrition, it must be divine plan. But if you are starving, you will have your own plan, won't you?" Unfortunately, we have twisted the basic aspect of life around suit of our own distorted, self-serving logic. In the name of divinity, we have taken away even the humanity from human beings. There has been too much talk about divinity in this world. You don't have to talk about the divine. If you allow your humanity to overflow, the divine will happen. It has to happen. The aim should be to make yourself in such a way that you enslave the divine, not the other way around. Karma means action. Whose action? My action. Whose responsibility? My responsibility. If you understand this simple formulation, karma will fall into place. No complex theory is necessary. Just look at it this way. The way I am right now is of my own making. The way I will be tomorrow is also will be of my making. This is karma. This is the most dynamic way to exist. Today, if a child walks before us without even basic nourishment in their body, this is our collective karma. It is our doing as a society, as a generation. We have not done what we needed to do to nourish that child. Maybe we do not produce that child. The child is the consequence of karma of two other individuals, but this is still our karma. Every time we see a malnourished child, a little pain happens within us. We cannot escape it, and this is our karma. We have the technologies at our disposal today that could either create phenomenal well-being or destroy the planet several times over. If the ignorant are empowered, they run the risk of sabotaging humanity entirely. It does not take a nuclear holocaust. We are capable of gassing ourselves without any nuclear assistance. However, when each of us realizes the enormous consequences of our volition, thoughts, and actions, it could be the dawn of the great possibility, a conscious planet. We can now turn not merely into the architects of our own destiny, but into collaborators in the collective destiny of the human race. The destiny debate and the astrology argument. So what about fate, destiny, and kismet? Do these play a role in determining our lives? Are the words relevant to all of our understanding of karma? It is time to demolish some myths right away. What you call fate is just a life situation you have created for yourself unconsciously. Your destiny is what you have crafted in unawareness. If you become 100% conscious, your destiny becomes a conscious creation. If you remain unconscious, you fall back on words like fate and providence to describe your predicament. It is as simple as that. For every action that we perform, there is a consequence. Whether the consequence bears fruit today, or tomorrow, or 10 years later is irrelevant. The point is that it always bears fruit one way or another. So some deeds you performed unconsciously many years ago, may have their consequences today. You may choose to call it fate, but you could as well call it your karma, your responsibility. If you are diagnosed with hypertension right now, you might think, "Oh, why did this happen to me? Why me? Why not my neighbor?" What most people don't acknowledge is that they have spent years of their lives routinely losing their temper. In modern society, it is considered a perfectly natural to get angry 5 times a day. People can always find reasons to that seem perfectly justifiable. But after years of doing this every day, isn't any wonder that so many get high blood pressure? After years of polluting our planet and refusing to change lifestyles, is it any wonder that so many other diseases are rampant in our world today? Are we not collectively responsible for these? The fact is that people make their own lives and societies write their own self-destructive narratives, but when they try to pass the buck to God or destiny, that may be convenient, but it is foolish and immature ways to exist. Since fate is your unconscious creation, it is extremely important that every aspect of your life happen consciously. Otherwise, you can go about poisoning your life without a clue about the damage you are inflicting on yourself. This brings us to a related question. If we determine that the course of our lives, what about astrology? What about all those people who have been amazingly accurate predictions, who have who have had amazingly accurate predictions made about their future? What is the significance of the natal charts or horoscopes, as I call them? That is so many live their lives by. If the business of fortune telling has endured for so many centuries, surely there must be some truth to it. Now, astrology is simply a way of plotting certain possibilities in a person's life. If I look at you because your karmic trajectory is immediately apparent to me, I'm able to say, okay, given your natural tendencies, this is the direction your life will take. There is nothing profound about this. Astrology is simply a possible roadmap for your life that takes into account tendencies and inherited traits. But consider this scenario. 1,000 years ago, if you were a seafarer and the winds were blowing east, you would go east. Maybe you wanted to go to America, but you end up in Japan. That was inevitable. The winds decided your destiny. Not anymore. Let the winds blow whichever way they want. Today, we still make sure we go where we want to go. We propel our own lives. We don't allow the winds to push us this way or that. Similarly, with the life process, if you are self propelled, we say you are on a spiritual path. If you are being pushed around by your accumulated tendencies, your habits and your prejudices, then you are at the mercy of your own horoscope. Traditionally, families in India turned to horoscopes because these would indicate a person's tendencies, karmic substance, the possible directions of their life may take. Based on the astrological reading, a person would turn to a spiritual practice that enabled them to transcend those tendencies. But somewhere along the way, we dropped the technology of transcendence and got stuck with just the horoscope. This is an unfortunate state of affairs. The spiritual practice is, by definition, always about taking your destiny in your own hands. If you want to fly, you might look at the weather, which way the winds are blowing, whether the rain clouds are coming your way, whether low pressure areas are, and so on. Traditionally, people turn to astrology for the same reason, but the aim was always to write one's own destiny, not allow it to be written by one's inherited predispositions and vasanas. The legendary story of Markandeya of in India mythology is a testament to the determination to take charge of one's own life. Although his early death was predicted, the courageous man triumphed over his own death. While he did not seek grace to overcome his death, learning how to become available to grace is also karma. This is what it means to be spiritual. It means that you are now willing to take the very process of life and death into your hands. It means you are now say to yourself, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who my forefathers were, what my karmic substance is. It doesn't matter what my past has been. I have decided that the way I am going. I have determined that I am moving toward my liberation. The horoscope in was in any case, meant only to be a way to navigate around possible obstacles. It was never meant to be a life script to be blindly followed. In fact, if you are on a spiritual path, authentic astrologers will never make predictions for you. Being spiritual means you are committed to charting your own destiny. When you are on such a path, when you are essentially saying the world is, I am not windblown, I am self propelled.